Today's lesson, 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. I'll let you get there, but I'm going to read it as well.
What version are you going to read it
I am in the New King James.
Okay.
But if you're using not the New King James, that's okay too. Here we are, chapter 2, 1 Thessalonians. For you yourselves know, brethren, that our coming to you was not in vain. But even after we had suffered before and were spitefully treated at Philippi, as you know, we were bold in our God to speak to you the gospel of God in much conflict. For our exhortation did not come from error or uncleanness, nor was it in deceit. But as we have been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel, even so we speak, not as pleasing men, but God, who tests our hearts. For neither at any time did we use flattering words, as you know, nor cloak for covetousness. God is witness. Nor did we seek glory from men, either from you or from others, when we might have made demands as apostles of Christ. But we were gentle among you, just as a nursing mother cherishes her own children, so affectionately longing for you. We were well pleased to impart to you not only the gospel of God, but also our own lives, because you had become dear to us. For you remember, brethren, our labor and toil, for laboring day and night, that we might not be a burden to any of you. We preach to you the gospel of God. You are witnesses, and God also, how devoutly and justly and blamelessly we behaved ourselves amongst you who believe, as you know how we exhorted and comforted and charged every one of you as a father does his own children, that you would walk worthy of God who calls you into his kingdom and glory. I think we'll pause there because there's a lot there. And then we'll continue on. Verse 1. Paul says, our coming to you was not in vain. Why would he say that?
Because they responded to the gospel proclamation.
They responded.
They didn't reject him, so his effort was not in vain with them.
Right. If it was in vain, Paul wouldn't have been writing to the Thessalonians. If they had kicked him out and got the dust off his shoes for him, Paul wouldn't have been writing back. But it was not in vain. Certainly, Paul set up the church there. In verse 2, but even after we had suffered before and were spitefully treated at Philippi, as you know, we were bold in our God to speak to you the gospel of God in much conflict. How were they bold, Paul and Silas? What made them bold? Why would they say they were bold?
They don't hesitate telling them that they are sinning in anything that they're doing. They just come right out and they boldly say it because they know the truth, and they are not hesitant in just coming out with it.
That's true. They're not wishy-washy about what they say. If they've got something to say, they do say it. What are some other ways they might be bold? Kevin.
Well, in Philippi, they were arrested by the Roman officials, but that didn't deter them here as well. They're still willing to speak up even though they're now on Rome's radar.
Absolutely. They've already been arrested by the Romans at Philippi. That's what he's mentioned in Philippi for. They were already arrested. Did it stop them? No, they kept going. how was everyone receptive in Thessalonica? Was everyone happy to see them? Was everyone receptive to what they had to say? What do we remember from last week? From chapter 1.
So what are we in?
1 Thessalonians.
Oh, okay.
Now, so last week we talked about how Thessalonians kind of started in Acts chapter 17, and how the Jews tried to run them out of Thessalonica. And more than just tried, they got them successfully run out of Thessalonica. And Paul's going to mention that again a little bit later, that even after that Paul and Silas were gone, the Jews of Thessalonica and some of the other people are still upset at the Thessalonian church, at this new church Paul has set up. They're still after them. They're still under persecution. So I would say, yes, all of those things are how they were bold, how Paul and Silas were bold. Follow-up question. I'm trying to remember if this one is rhetorical. I have some rhetorical think for yourself questions here. But do we face the same persecution? Can we be bold? Are we bold the same way that Paul and Silas were?
We could be, but we're not usually. It's not an easy thing to do.
No, it's not easy to be bold.
No, we should be bold, but sometimes we're not.
Sometimes we're not bold. I have a follow-up question to that. Are we bringing the message like Paul and Silas? And I'll go ahead and say, no, obviously not. Obviously, we're not bringing it like Paul and Silas are. Bringing it around to people that have never heard, like what? This is 50 AD? Maybe 20 years? 20 years after Jesus died and was resurrected, right around then? 20 years? Okay, so not that many people have heard about Jesus. We're 2,000 plus years now. It's not the same situation. That's true. But are we working on spreading the message throughout the world? Right? And again, Kokomo's part of that world too. Your neighborhood is part of that world too. Your work is part of that world too. Am I doing it at my work? No. Am I knocking doors? Not even saying knocking doors works. In neighborhoods? No. Am I telling even my neighbors, hey, you should come to church with us? Most of the time, no. Most of the time, no. So I get it. It's kind of answering for myself there. But are we bold in our message?
On social media, I found out that you have to be careful because you can be bold, and the next thing you know, you get a bunch of people that don't like your comments. And I've had, like Facebook, for example, then they start restricting what you can do just because people don't like what you're saying, even though what you're saying is the truth or something positive. So it's kind of a mild persecution, but that's what it is. And you can get that whether you're talking to a person or a group, or even if you are on like any kind of social media. So it's not as easy as sometimes, even if you want to say some things, you can't always do it.
Right. I'll tell you what, social media, if there was ever a good modern day parable about tossing your pearls before swine, it's to go and start a Facebook conversation like that. Hoo-wee. You're gonna get you're going to get the herd, and you're going to get the friends' herds, and it's going to blow up and not in a direction that you want to blow up in. Absolutely. So yeah, what are some other things that we face? Right, Paul and Silas were essentially run out of Thessalonica, and what are some things that we face? What are some other things we face? Bob mentioned, on Facebook sometimes you just get censored. You get restricted. You get limited in what you can say. They don't let you say as much. What are some other things that we might face? I don't know, you might get a reputation, right? For being that guy or that lady, which is not always a bad thing for you. Like, how bad would it be? Like, oh yeah, he is one of the Jesus freaks. Well, that's okay. That's okay. It's got some other connotations for you with other people, but for yourself, that's not a bad thing, right? Paul somewhere else says, if we're crazy for Christ. And I'm okay with that. And more follow-up questions to this. I really had a lot of questions for this one. How do we overcome some of these challenges that we face?
Well, usually, I guess you'd have to say by trying new things, and if you start small and figure out what is successful, then maybe you can duplicate that. Try first, right?
Right. Trying new things. One of you, whoever says it first.
Oh, I was just going to say, if you are shunned by certain people or whatever, I mean, you just have to try to get to know them some, if they'll allow you, and then once they get to know you, then that can open doors.
Right. Was it?
You have to know you. I mean, you have to know them.
When Paul was working with the Thessalonians, does anyone remember how long it says that he was there talking with them? That's all right. I'm the teacher. It was 3 weeks. Yes. Paul was in the synagogue talking with them, reasoning with them, getting to know them for 3 weeks. He didn't get there in one day. He didn't pull a Jonah going to Nineveh. He didn't get there and say, okay, you're all in big trouble. Good luck. And Nineveh responded to that. But that's not what the Thessalonians did, and that's not what Paul did. Paul was preaching the message, and he was reasoning with them. He was in their place of worship, the synagogue, and obviously out of the synagogue too. He was working around for 3 weeks. So yeah, if you are reasoning with people for 3 weeks, you are trying some different things. You've got some different approaches, some different lines of reasoning, different things that are working. Last question for verse 2. Kind of been hovering around this one. Is how do we share the good news of Jesus? Or do we feel a little burnt out?
The term burnt out, I guess I don't like the term because did Paul get burnt out? he never quit, he didn't give up.
He never quit.
So something kept him motivated, kept him going. Even though he said, like in Philippi, he was in prison, he was insulted. It's pretty easy for us to say, well, I've tried that, I just give up. It'd be easy to do, but I don't think God expects us to get burned out or quit or give up. And, prayer helps. Their fellowship with one another helps to encourage one another to keep on. And I think that's why it's important to be here with the group, is to encourage everybody to just keep with it. Because it's pretty easy to quit and give up. I mean, sometimes we just throw our hands up and say, I've had enough. And I don't think that's the right way to do it.
Okay. Yeah, so maybe burnt out isn't something that we should accept for ourselves. Kim?
There were some times in the New Testament where the apostles were told that when they went out, when Jesus sent out like 70 people in twos, and he says, if they don't accept you, they don't treat you right, they won't listen to you, then shake the dust off your feet and go to the next place. Just keep going. Maybe someone else will have better luck. Not luck, really, but.
Right. And are we then shaking off the dust from our feet and moving on, trying to find that group in Thessalonica that's going to respond really well? Right, and this is more one of those internal reflection questions, because everyone's going to have a different answer. I told you mine. I don't go out into all the world, even my small one that's around me, nearly as much as I should. Yeah.
I've just been sitting here pondering your question, and I kind of think the answer is we get so tangled up in the physical life, busyness, whatever, that we don't see that longer term spiritual aspect that, this life isn't going to last forever. It's going to be short. And then once that's over, you're going to be in the spirit world. So do we understand that? We know a lot of people just, they don't even recognize that aspect of their life. And so I think maybe pondering some of those thoughts might help us to be eager to share what our understanding is, because it's going to matter,
The consequences are huge.
Yeah, 100 years from now, what's important?
Right. And what are we doing about it? Think about it. Verses 4 through 6. But as we have been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel, even so we speak, not as pleasing men, but God who tests our hearts. For neither at any time did we use flattering words, as you know, nor cloak for covetousness, God is witness. Nor did we seek glory from men, either from you or from others, when we might have made demands as apostles of Christ. So, not as pleasing men, but trying to please God. Thoughts on that? What does that look like? What's trying to please men, right? And that's what Paul didn't do. That's what Paul and Silas didn't do. And it doesn't say that we were trying to please a little bit of men and a little bit of God. So what is What does pleasing men look like? A message that pleases men.
Well, you change the message so that people will accept it on their own terms rather than on God's terms.
Well, yeah.
Okay, you're doing this, that's okay. That's still good.
Changing the message a little bit. Working hard not to step on any toes. Even if you got to change God's message a little bit. Sure, that would please men. To be told you're in the right. Who doesn't like to be told they're right? I love being told I'm right. Hey, I've got this idea. Oh, that's a pretty good idea, Alex. I like that. I like that. Alex.
So this makes me think of 1 Corinthians 9 when he says, I became all things to all men, or something along those lines. Like his methodology, maybe a bit, his personality was kind of shifted, but he never changed the message that he brought.
Yeah.
That was the constant, to make sure that that was right with God, and the rest of it, how he approached people, that might change to make them more comfortable and more receptive to it.
Absolutely. Alex brings up a great point. It's not saying that you only have one thing to say and only one way to say it. Paul says, I became all things to all men. But Paul's still preaching the gospel. He's not watering it down. He's not changing it around at all. He's not preaching to get the pat on the back from men. He's still preaching to get the pat on the back from God. He says, yes, that's my message. That's what I want you to say. But yeah, certainly you make connections. But you're not doing it to get the pat on the back from some other people.
Alan?
Yes.
So you talked about preaching the gospel. What does gospel mean?
Good news.
The good news. So have you, in your own way, put together what is good news that you can share with people? I think that's a really, really important concept, grasp. So what is this good news, and how do I present it so they will perceive it as really good news?
Ooh. That's a good line of thought. What is the good news to you? And I thought about this a little bit before. If you came upon an easy and legal thing to do, and I made you lots of money, bring you everything you ever wanted, and sharing it wouldn't take away yours at all, wouldn't you be happy to go and tell people? Like, hey, listen, I did this thing and my mortgage is paid off. Let me tell you about it because I know what the stress of mortgage is. Hey, I read this book. The things in it, they helped me to lose 100 pounds that I didn't need to carry anymore. Let me tell you about it because it looks like, I'm not judging, but you might be able to lose 10 yourself. And this book made it super easy. Let me tell you about it. Problem is not there, right? You couldn't stop me from telling people. Like, hey, did you know you can pay off your mortgage in literally 3 easy steps? Right? So yeah, what is that good news to you? What is that good news that you're spreading? What are we telling Jesus? What are we telling about Jesus?
The biggest controversy among God's people at the time Jesus was preaching was whether there was life after death or not. And the Sadducees did not believe in any of that. They didn't believe in angels. They didn't believe in resurrection, any of that. So I think somewhere in all of that, the good news is everlasting life with God. I mean, what a retirement plan.
Yeah. Next question following up on this. What does glory from God, right? They said they weren't seeking glory from men. In verse 6, nor did we seek glory from men. What does glory from God look like?
Well, if we go back to the book of Acts and we look at what happened when they went there, they went to the synagogue and proclaimed that Jesus was the Messiah, that he's risen from the dead, and he's going to come back and judge the world. And he had a lot of opposition on that from certain people who didn't want to believe that Jesus actually was the Messiah. And in this case, to be aligned with the glory of God is to preach this unpopular message to people who are not wanting to hear it. And so obviously, to seek glory from God is to, in this case, be able to proclaim this message that God has sent his Messiah, and Jesus is that Messiah, that he's risen from the dead, and he's coming back to judge the world. And that wasn't exactly what some of these people wanted to hear. Not all of them thought that way, but there was a group of them who ran them out of town.
Yeah.
And they did not pull back from proclaiming that. Because the gospel really is a proclamation. It's not a sales job. You're not trying to convince people that they need this, because the gospel is what God is doing to the world, right? He created the world fell into sin, and now the gospel is the good news that God has provided a Messiah to lead the Jewish people as well as the Gentile people in the ways of God. And that message doesn't resonate with everyone.
And what does the glory of God come in for us? I think it's more at the end of the day, more at the end of the life, right? Jesus, in one of his parables, talks about hearing, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Boy, that's it. That's what you want, right? That's what I feel like Paul is seeking, that glory from God. That you done good, kid. Moving on to verse 7. I know, my questions they don't have any good flow to it, but they're all in 1 Thessalonians 2 here. Verses 7 and 8. But we were gentle among you, just as a nursing mother cherishes her own children. So affectionately longing for you, we were well pleased to impart to you not only the gospel of God, but also our own lives, because you had become dear to us. I just want you to consider how excited a mom-to-be is when, and I'm guessing here, never having been a mother, you got this little baby in you, and you feel it kicking. You feel the hope building. You know it's coming. You know that little baby inside is going to be on the outside. and you're excited. And then the baby is born. And from what I've seen, mothers really do like to just cherish that little baby and hold that little baby and be as gentle as possible with that little baby. Watching his head, wrapping him up tight. Don't let him swing because he'll swing and scratch maybe. Holding him tight, keeping him warm, keeping him soft, never letting him cry. Super excited to see him always. And that's kind of what Paul's talking about. Being excited for this church to come to fruition. We are gentle among you, just as a nursing mother cherishes her own children. Super excited, watching them grow. I mean, I know it takes a while for kids to take their first step and to start crawling and making any more than crying noises. But church can grow a little bit faster than that, and it would be exciting to see how that church is growing. We were pleased to impart to you not only the gospel of God, but also our own lives, because you had become dear to us. For you remember, brethren, our labor and toil, for laboring day and night that we might not be a burden to any of you. We preach to you the gospel of God. And in verse 10, you are a witness, and God also, how devoutly and justly and blamelessly we behaved ourselves among you who believe. I feel like Paul is, I don't know, I'm thinking about it now, and I feel like Paul's getting a reputation around the area he's in. Maybe even a troublemaker. Because where Paul goes, trouble also seems to go, doesn't it? And they're throwing him out of towns, they're arresting him, he's getting thrown in jail, putting up for the court, like, If you know someone, everywhere they go, riots show up afterwards, you might start to wonder, is this guy really a good guy or not? Good guys don't start riots.
Unfortunately, there were people that did not like what Paul had to say, and they followed him from town to town to try to stir up the people. So he had people that disliked him that followed after him, whatever town he went to.
Yeah. So maybe it wasn't Paul who was causing all the problems. It was his not fan base following him around. In verse 11, as you know how we exhorted and comforted and charged every one of you as a father does with his own children. Another parental comparison here. We exhorted and comforted and charged every one of you as a father does his own children, that you would walk worthy of God who calls you into his own kingdom and glory. What does? I mean, you know about fathers charging their kids. I told mine before we got to church, because they're acting a little rascally this morning. Like, hey, I expect you to be good at church today. We're not causing problems. That little noisemaker thing, fine for the car, not for the church. I'm going to take it away if I got to. Right? We know about fathers charging their children to do well. And it's not quite what Paul is saying here. Paul's not saying he's going to take away their toy. Paul's in general telling them to do well. Kim.
I'm just going to tell you that when I was in college, there was a man who would come to our campus, and he'd be right in the middle of things, and he knew that he really did not care for the students at all, but he's yelling, you're all going to hell. And he's trying, preaching at these students, and the students would heckle him and everything. And so,
Goodness.
that is doing no good whatsoever. He was not doing any good for the students at all because of the way he was preaching.
Right.
And I don't think Paul did that.
Paul didn't just come and yell at him.
Paul was not doing it that way. I mean, they were endeared to him, and he was as he was to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Eh? Excited like a mother cherishing her newborn child, and taking a little bit of responsibility like a dad, and telling him, go get him. This is how you do it. Go get it. Try it again. You're going to get it this time. Verse 12. That you would walk worthy of God who calls you into his own kingdom and glory. What does it mean to walk worthy of God who calls you into his own kingdom and glory?
Well, they and we have been called out of our sinful ways into God's way of doing things.
Yeah, Bobby.
It's kind of like how you told your kids, I expect you to be good at church. God says to us like a father, I expect you to be good.
Walk worthy of God who calls you into his own kingdom. I've thought about accepting Jesus before kind of like getting your clothes washed. Imagine your clothes are filthy, you've been rolling around in the mud, you got hot dog mustard on you because you like mustard on your hot dogs because that's where you should like your hot dogs. But you got the mustard on you, you've been rolling around in the mud, you got who knows what else spilled on you. Paint, you sat down on the bench that had fresh paint on it, and God cleans your clothes for you. The best way to thank God is not to go roll around in the mud and get mustard and get paint again on you. That's what I'm kind of thinking, right? Whatever got you into problems before, and leave those problems where they're at, washed away and gone, as best you can. We're going to get into it late. Well, we'll talk a little bit about it now. When we miss the mark, which is another definition of sinning. I think that's the original meaning of the word sin, is just to miss. It's an archery term. You missed. When we sin, when we don't live up to the standards we think we ought to, when we don't walk worthy of God every step, are we cast aside?
Well, not if we repent of it, no.
Oh, I'm thinking back to Jesus, who's got every right to judge people, talking about the woman who's brought before him. Like, Jesus, we caught her in the act of adultery. What are we going to do with her? He says to her, go and sin no more. When everyone else is gone, he's like, hey, who among you is going to throw the first stone here? Right? Whoever hasn't committed a sin, go ahead, start throwing stones at her. And when it's only her and Jesus left, he says, I'm not going to throw any stones at you. Go and sin no more. Was she in trouble? She had done some things. How would it feel to be put in the Bible for that? Right? Hey, you're going to make it into the Bible here, not for any reason that you want to. You're going to be called out for, we're getting all mess of trouble here. But does Jesus throw stones at her? No.
God's never asked us to do anything that wasn't in our best interest.
Right, so...
Everything he's asked will make our lives better. And it'll take us away from things that will really mess us up. And I think as soon as we recognize that, then we can start seeking, well, what is it he wants me to be doing? It's for our best interest every time.
When Paul's got to write to his churches about things they're doing wrong, does Paul say, that's it, you're out, you're done? Or does he say, stop doing the bad thing and come back to what you know was right?
Well, because at first there wouldn't be a 2 Corinthians.
Right? Couldn't hear Kevin. If he did that with 1 Corinthians, there wouldn't be a 2 Corinthians. Right? Paul doesn't give up on people. And Jesus doesn't give up on people either, even if you're not walking worthy of God. One misstep isn't going to get you kicked off the path. Isn't going to get you kicked out. Do we need to fix some things? Yes. But is that the end of the story? No. With that being the second bell, and it being time enough, and a good spot, we're going to end there for today.